Every stone in a forgotten wall holds a story waiting to be heard. We are about to learn the silent language of ruins, a skill that will let you read the rise and fall of entire civilizations in the buildings they left behind. The great historian Will Durant described civilization as a stream with banks. He said the stream itself is often filled with conflict, but on the banks, people build homes and live their lives. This is the story written on those banks. In the architectural remnants of lost kingdoms, we will uncover why a misplaced cornerstone can rewrite history and how a city's layout reveals its deepest social contracts. This journey explores how structures are not merely shelters, but the frozen dreams and fears of a people, offering urgent lessons for our own time. How do you think our own cities will speak to the future? A single misplaced cornerstone found deep in the jungle forced historians to throw out their maps. The official records, written on fragile scrolls, told one story of a kingdom's borders, but this solitary stone, set at a strange angle in a forgotten temple platform, told another. It proved the kingdom reached farther and fell later than anyone had believed. This is the profound power of architecture as a historical document. While paper burns and memories fade, stone and mortar endure, offering an unfiltered, often brutally honest, account of who a people truly were. The great archaeologist Louis Binford taught us to see these structures not just as art, but as fossils of a society's adaptive strategies. They are the physical solutions to the problems of survival and ambition. We can read a civilization's entire resume in its walls. The choice between using rough, unshaped fieldstones or investing in precisely cut ashlar blocks is not merely an aesthetic one. It is a direct report on the kingdom's economic health. Rough stone speaks of local materials and decentralized, perhaps rushed, labor, but precision-cut stone, with its perfectly square edges and seamless joints, shouts of centralized power. It tells us a ruler had the wealth to quarry, transport, and employ specialized artisans for years. This is the foundational skill, learning to read a building like a complex historical text. Every arch is a chapter on engineering knowledge, every column a verse about social hierarchy, and every city wall a paragraph on collective fear and hope. If these silent stones could tell such vivid stories about the past, what undeniable truths will our own glass and steel cities one day whisper to the future? That first glimpse of the Great Pyramid of Giza, a mountain of stone built by human hands, is a moment that silences all rational thought. You are not just looking at a building, you are witnessing a civilization's ambition made permanent. Monumental architecture is a kingdom shouting its name into the future. These colossal projects, from the stepped ziggurats of Mesopotamia to the giant heads of Easter Island, are the first and most dramatic clue we have to a society's peak power. They are audacious statements of control. To build on such a scale requires more than just wealth. It demands an almost unimaginable degree of organization. A strong, centralized authority had to be in place, one capable of conscripting thousands of laborers, managing complex supply chains for food and materials, and employing master engineers whose plans would span generations. Think of the Roman aqueducts marching across the landscape on their graceful arches. They were not just clever plumbing, they were a declaration. The empire was announcing its mastery over nature itself, bending rivers to its will and bringing fresh water to its cities from miles away. The scale of construction is a direct measure of a state's confidence and its ruler's burning desire to be remembered forever, to achieve a form of immortality in stone. Yet that very grandeur often casts a long shadow. The same society that could marshal such incredible resources to glorify its gods and leaders was also making a profound and often perilous trade-off. The grain that fed the army of workers carving a pharaoh's tomb was grain not stored for a famine. The taxes levied to pay for a soaring temple were wealth not invested in roads or village wells. This immense concentration of effort, while creating an enduring symbol of power, could quietly hollow out the economic resilience of the kingdom from within, creating a fragile giant, magnificent to behold but vulnerable to the slightest push. The sheer thickness of a fortress wall is more than just a measurement of stone, it is a measure of fear. We can read a kingdom's deepest anxieties in the imposing, labyrinthine defenses of a citadel like Mycenae. These structures are a civilization's immune system, a physical reaction to perceived threats. Defensive architecture, from towering walls to deep moats and heavily fortified gates, provides a brutally honest window into a society's geopolitical reality. The presence of increasingly complex and layered defenses almost always coincides with a period of escalating external pressure or growing internal instability. As the historian John Keegan observed, the specific design of fortifications is a direct reflection of contemporary warfare. Consider the concentric castles built by the Crusaders in the Holy Land. Their design, with multiple rings of walls, one inside the other, was not an artistic choice. It was a desperate, ingenious adaptation, an evolved response to the powerful new siege technologies and tactics they faced. This architectural paranoia reveals a profound psychological shift in a society. It marks a turn inward, a reallocation of immense resources from expansion to protection. The wealth and labor that once built magnificent temples and sprawling trade networks are now poured into sheer survival. When you see a civilization beginning to barricade itself behind ever higher walls, it is often a clear signal that its golden age of confident, outward growth is waning. But while walls define a kingdom's borders, the true story of its people is written in the organization of the space within them. The true character of a civilization is written not just in its grand monuments, but in the very ground beneath its citizens' feet. Step into the ancient city of Mohenjo-Daro, its streets laid out in a perfect, almost modern grid. This was not an accident of geography. This was a conscious design, a master plan executed with a precision that speaks of a powerful, centralized authority. The wide main avenues, the uniform brick sizes used across the entire city, and the astonishingly advanced drainage system running beneath the streets all point to a society that valued order, public health, and a remarkable degree of social equality. This urban blueprint is a physical contract between the rulers and the ruled. It tells us that someone or some governing body had the vision and the power to impose a logical structure on the chaos of human settlement, prioritizing communal well-being and efficient movement. This kind of planning is a civilization at its most confident and organized. Contrast this with the chaotic, winding lanes of a medieval European town that often sprouted within the crumbling walls of a former Roman fortress. The Romans, masters of order, built their military camps or castrums with a rigid grid of straight roads intersecting at right angles. When their empire collapsed, that central planning vanished. The towns that grew in the ruins were not planned, they simply happened. They grew organically, following the paths of animals or the whims of individual landowners, resulting in a tangled maze of streets. This haphazard growth is a clear architectural clue pointing to a period of social fragmentation, where no single authority held enough power to impose a grand design. The shift from the orderly Roman grid to the chaotic medieval town is a story of collapsed central planning written directly into the urban landscape. This organization, or the lack of it, is a direct reflection of the stability and ambition of the governing body, and often that governing body derived its power from a source beyond the physical world, from the spiritual beliefs that shaped every aspect of life, from the grandest temple to the humblest home. A towering pyramid does more than scrape the sky, it shapes the human mind. Step inside the cavernous hall of a Maya temple, where the architecture itself was a celestial clock. On the solstice, a beam of sunlight would pierce the inner darkness, illuminating a specific carving of a god. This was no accident of design, it was engineered theater, a spectacle meant to inspire awe and reinforce a single, powerful idea that the king alone could communicate with the heavens. Religious structures, from the grandest cathedral to the most imposing ziggurat, were the ultimate instruments of ideological control. They were built to overwhelm the senses, to make the divine feel terrifyingly present and the ruler's authority seem unquestionably ordained. When a society channels its finest artisans, its most valuable materials, and its greatest wealth into the construction of temples, it is making a profound statement about its priorities. The state religion is not just a belief system, it is the bedrock of power. We can trace the evolution of this power in the stones themselves. The transition from small, local shrines serving a single village to massive, state-sponsored temple complexes is a monumental shift. It marks the moment when spiritual authority is consolidated and harnessed by a central ruling class. This is the birth of a theocracy, a society where the political and the spiritual are fused into one. The ruler becomes a god-king or a divine intermediary, and the temple is his throne room. This fusion is a brilliantly effective tool for social cohesion. A shared belief, monumentalized in stone, can unite disparate peoples under a single banner and justify immense collective labor, like building a pyramid that will take generations to complete. Yet this very strength contains the seeds of fragility. The awe-inspiring temple, a symbol of unshakable unity in its prime, becomes the most haunting ruin after a fall. Its empty halls speak of a belief system that collapsed, a contract between the people and their gods that was broken. And the sheer scale of these silent, sacred stones forces us to ask a very practical question. What immense wealth was required to bring them into being, and where did it all come from? The silent stones of a temple tell a story of faith, but the very substance they are made of reveals a civilization's genius. The revolutionary Roman invention of concrete fundamentally reshaped their world. This was not just a new kind of mortar, it was a magical material that could be poured into molds, set underwater, and harden into a rock-like mass stronger than anything before it. It allowed Roman engineers to build the Pantheon's vast, unsupported dome, a soaring ceiling of stone that seemed to defy gravity, a feat of structural engineering that would not be matched for over 1,000 years. This is our fifth great architectural clue, the direct evidence of engineering and technological innovation. A kingdom's architectural advances are a pure measure of its scientific knowledge and its practical, problem-solving capabilities. We can track a society's intellectual vitality through its evolving mastery of arches, vaults, water management, and material science. These are not abstract ideas, they are physical solutions born from necessity and ambition. Consider the sophisticated qanat systems of ancient Persia. In a stark, arid landscape, Persian engineers did not just dig wells. They designed and constructed vast underground tunnels that sloped gently for miles, tapping into water trapped deep within mountain aquifers and channeling it to the surface without a single drop lost to evaporation. This was a monumental innovation in hydraulic engineering that turned deserts into blooming gardens, supporting large, stable populations and fueling an empire. Such technological leaps almost always coincide with a culture's most prosperous and expansive phase, when it has the resources, the confidence, and the need to push the boundaries of the possible. Yet the opposite is also tragically true. A stagnation in this development, or even a reversion to simpler, cruder building techniques, is one of the clearest archaeological signals of a society in deep trouble. When you see a later building constructed on the ruins of a more advanced civilization, using smaller stones and simpler designs, it speaks volumes. It tells a story of economic decline, a shattered trade network that could no longer import specialized materials, or a terrifying loss of specialized knowledge, as if an entire library of engineering had been burned. This technological backsliding is a quiet but powerful foreshadowing of a final collapse, a decline that we will soon see reflected in the most intimate spaces of all, the homes where ordinary people lived and died. The grandeur of a pyramid speaks of gods and kings, but the soot-blackened stones of a common hearth tell the story of the people who lived in its shadow. Peer into the excavated remains of a Viking longhouse, a structure that was both home and social universe. Its entire design, from the single, central hearth to the raised earthen benches along the walls, was a physical diagram of daily life. The hearth was the beating heart of the home, a source of warmth, light, and cooked food. The placement of sleeping areas around it, with the most desirable spots farthest from the drafty door, subtly outlined the family's internal hierarchy. This is our sixth and most intimate architectural clue, the story told by domestic architecture. While temples and fortresses reveal a civilization's public face, the design and quality of common homes provide an unfiltered look at the standard of living for the average person. Variations in house size, construction materials, and the presence of even small luxury goods, like a piece of imported pottery or a sliver of glass for a window, reveal profound economic disparities and the rigid social stratification that defined a society. A period of widespread prosperity is often marked by clear improvements in domestic architecture. You see the evidence in better ventilation systems, the addition of separate rooms for different functions, and the use of more durable materials for roofs and walls. This signals that wealth was trickling down, that the common citizen had the resources and security to invest in a better quality of life. Conversely, the archaeological record can show a sudden, telling shift toward cheaper, flimsier construction. One of the most poignant examples comes from the late Roman Empire, where the spacious, elegant villas of the wealthy were often hastily subdivided into multiple, cramped apartments. This was not a stylistic choice, it was a desperate adaptation. It signals severe economic hardship and intense population pressure, as the social contract frayed and the elite scrambled to monetize their properties while the masses crowded into ever smaller spaces. This decline in the quality of daily life, written plainly in the walls of the home, is a quiet but powerful prelude to a society's final unraveling. And just as the walls of a home frame a family's existence, the art they chose to place within those walls reveals what they valued, what they feared, and what they hoped to leave behind. A single, silent carving on a temple wall can shout a civilization's deepest truths. High on the facade of a Khmer temple like Angkor Wat, every inch of sandstone is alive with intricate scenes. Gods and demons clash in epic battles from mythology, while elsewhere, the king himself is depicted leading his armies in glorious procession. This is not mere decoration, it is a society broadcasting its identity, its beliefs, and its power in the most permanent medium possible. The presence and overwhelming quality of artistic embellishment is our seventh great architectural clue, a direct reflection of a society's cultural confidence and its surplus wealth. In a kingdom's golden age, art is not a luxury, it is a tool. It is abundant, breathtakingly refined, and almost always serves a propagandistic purpose, celebrating the state's values and legitimizing its victories for all to see. This level of artistry requires a stable, wealthy patron, typically the ruling class or a powerful priesthood, who can afford to feed and house generations of master sculptors and painters for work that offers no immediate practical return. It is the ultimate expression of a civilization feeling secure, prosperous, and unshakable in its own identity. But just as the style of this art reveals a society's soul, its decline tells an even more poignant story. A gradual shift towards simpler, more utilitarian design, or the clumsy, repetitive copying of once grand motifs, is a clear signal of distress. It indicates a loss of that vital patronage, often due to economic downturn or internal strife. The artists are gone, their skills forgotten in the struggle for mere survival. We can see this dramatic shift etched in stone across the ancient Aegean. The art of Minoan Crete, preserved in places like the Palace of Knossos, is a riot of life and motion. Their frescoes depict leaping dolphins, elegant priestesses, and floral patterns that seem to breathe, reflecting a culture seemingly confident, connected to the sea, and focused on natural beauty. Contrast this with the art that emerges from the later Mycenaean Greeks, who built massive citadels like Mycenae. Their art becomes dominated by scenes of warfare, hunting, and imposing lion gates. The change in artistic theme and tone tells a clear story of a world that has become a more dangerous, militarized place, where cultural priorities have shifted from celebrating life to preparing for death. This artistic fingerprint, so vivid in its prime and so telling in its decay, pushes us to ask the final, foundational question. What immense underlying system was required to generate the wealth that made such beauty possible in the first place, and what happened when that system began to fail? A forgotten Roman road, now just a grassy track cutting across a farmer's field, was once the empire's lifeline. These were not mere paths, but masterpieces of engineering, layered with gravel, sand, and massive stone slabs designed to drain water and last for centuries. They were the arteries through which the lifeblood of the empire flowed, legions marching to distant frontiers, merchants carrying exotic goods, and imperial messengers relaying the emperor's commands. A kingdom's infrastructure, its roads, bridges, ports, and granaries, forms the literal skeleton of its economy and administrative control. This is our eighth and perhaps most revealing architectural clue, the physical network that reveals the true strength or weakness of a central state. When this network is extensive and meticulously maintained, it signals a powerful, interconnected kingdom capable of efficient taxation, long-distance trade, and the rapid deployment of its military might to any trouble spot. The system only works if a strong, centralized authority exists to plan it, fund its construction, and protect the travelers who use it. The decay of this network, however, is one of the most unambiguous archaeological signatures of a state in its death throes. Consider the great harbor of Ephesus, one of the most important cities of the ancient world. Its wealth was built on its access to the sea, a bustling port where ships from across the Mediterranean would dock. But over time, the river that fed the harbor carried silt downstream, slowly, inexorably clogging the bay. A functioning central government would have mobilized vast resources to dredge the harbor, to fight against nature itself to preserve its economic heart. Yet the silting continued. The harbor turned to marshland, then to dry land, pushing the coastline miles away. The great port city was left stranded, its trade routes severed, its wealth evaporating. This was not a sudden catastrophe, but a slow, suffocating decline written directly into the landscape. The failure to maintain this critical piece of infrastructure was a silent admission that the central authority no longer had the will, the wealth, or the power to perform its most basic duties. As the roads crumbled and the bridges fell, communities that were once tightly bound into a single economic unit began to turn inward. Regions became isolated, trade became local and impoverished, and the shared identity of a unified kingdom fractured into 1,000 pieces. This fragmentation of a once great network is a physical prelude to the final act, a collapse so complete that it forces us to confront the ultimate architectural mystery. What happens when the last light of a civilization goes out and the long silence of the ruins begins? The colossal statues of Ramses II at Abu Simbel were not built for the people of his time alone. They were a message carved for eternity, a declaration of invincible power aimed at his subjects, his enemies, and the gods themselves. This is the ninth and perhaps most intentional architectural clue: the use of symbolism and propaganda in stone. Long before mass media, architecture was the primary medium for broadcasting a ruler's authority and the state's unshakable ideology. It was a tool of psychological control designed to overwhelm and persuade. The sheer, inhuman scale of the statues, their alignment with the sun to create dazzling effects on specific days, and the endless repetition of royal iconography were all calculated choices. They were meant to make the pharaoh's power feel as permanent and inevitable as the landscape. Across the ancient world, we see this same strategy. The Egyptian cartouche, an oval loop containing a king's name, was etched into every temple wall and obelisk, a constant visual reminder of who ruled. The Roman eagle, carried by legions and mounted on standards, was a symbol of imperial power that branded every conquered territory. This incessant repetition was a form of cognitive branding, an attempt to write the state's legitimacy directly onto the minds of its people. Yet the very permanence of this stone propaganda makes its destruction all the more telling. When a new regime rose to power, it understood that to truly conquer a people, it had to conquer their memory. The Romans practiced a chillingly formal ritual known as damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. The statues of a disgraced emperor would be torn down, his name systematically chiseled off public inscriptions, and his face recarved into the likeness of his successor. This was not random vandalism. It was an ideological purge, an attempt to assassinate a man's legacy and rewrite history itself in stone. The defacement of these symbols provides undeniable physical evidence of a violent regime change. It shows us that the power so confidently projected by those colossal statues was, in the end, a fragile illusion. The scars left by chisels on a forgotten plinth whisper the true story of that fragility, a story that leads us inevitably to the final, cataclysmic evidence of a kingdom's fall, the unmistakable burn marks of its violent end. A burn layer is an archaeologist's darkest page in a city's history. In the ruins of ancient cities, you can sometimes find a distinct, blackened line of charcoal and ash running through the soil, a stark, horizontal scar that marks a single, catastrophic moment in time. These are not the slow accumulations of domestic hearths, but the sudden, violent residue of a city set ablaze. This is our 10th and most visceral architectural clue, the undeniable evidence of conflict and destruction. The ruins themselves hold a forensic record of their own violent end. Look beyond the dramatic casts of Pompeii's victims, and you will find more subtle, yet equally telling, signs. A section of a city wall, hastily repaired with mismatched stones and rubble, speaks of a desperate, last-minute attempt to shore up defenses against a looming threat. Arrowheads, their iron tips still wedged in the timber of a gatehouse, tell you the exact direction from which the final assault came. These are the archaeological fingerprints of siege, invasion, or civil war, and the pattern of the destruction often reveals the attacker. When a fire selectively consumes only the royal palace, the treasury, and the homes of the elite, while leaving common neighborhoods relatively untouched, the evidence strongly suggests an internal uprising, a revolt by the people against their rulers. In contrast, widespread, indiscriminate devastation, with every building looted and burned, points to an external invader with no stake in preserving the city's infrastructure. These violent chapters are the final, brutal punctuation in a civilization story, starkly recorded in the scorched stones and hastily dug mass graves found within the city walls. But after the fires burn out and the silence falls, a different, slower story begins, written not in the drama of destruction, but in the quiet, patient work of the earth itself, reclaiming what was lost. The grand columns of a Roman temple, once dedicated to Jupiter, now support the vaulted ceiling of a Catholic church. This transformation is not destruction. It is a palimpsest, a manuscript where the old text has been scraped away to make room for the new, yet the ghost of the original writing remains visible underneath. The abandonment and repurposing of structures is our 11th architectural clue, a profound record of cultural change and practical necessity. When a society lacks the resources or the will to build anew, it begins to cannibalize its own past. This practice, known as spoliation, is a silent but powerful admission of decline. The medieval builders who pulled perfectly cut stones from a crumbling Roman amphitheater to construct their town walls were making a stark statement. They were admitting that the engineering knowledge, the economic muscle, and the centralized organization required to quarry and dress such stones themselves had been lost. They were living in the shadow of a greater age, recycling its bones because they could no longer create their own. The pattern of this reuse tells its own story. A gradual, orderly abandonment might see a palace slowly converted into a warren of smaller homes, its grand hall subdivided by flimsy walls. Archaeologists might find caches of valuables carefully hidden, suggesting the inhabitants hoped to return one day. A rapid, panicked flight, however, leaves a different scene entirely. A cooking pot still resting in the ashes of a hearth, or a child's toy dropped on the floor, speaks of a catastrophe that gave no time for farewells. But the most telling repurposing is ideological. That Roman basilica, a hall of law and commerce, being reconsecrated as a Christian church, is more than just a practical reuse of a sturdy building. It is a symbolic takeover. The very heart of secular Roman power was being physically and spiritually converted into the new center of spiritual authority, a permanent, stone-carved declaration that the old gods were dead and a new era had begun. These acts of recycling force us to confront a difficult question: what immense pressure, what shifting climate or exhausted land could compel a people to leave their homes and monuments behind, turning their proud cities into mere quarries for their descendants? The silent, terraced steps of an Indian stepwell descend deep into the earth, offering more than just water. They provided a sanctuary from the blistering sun, a cool, subterranean world where a community could gather, trade news, and find respite. This is our 12th architectural clue, the profound story of environmental adaptation and resource management. A civilization's architecture is its most honest dialogue with the natural world, a record of how it understood its environment and either thrived in balance with it or ultimately sowed the seeds of its own destruction. The Anasazi people of the American Southwest built their breathtaking cliff dwellings into steep canyon walls. This was not merely for defense. The massive rock faces acted as a natural thermal mass, absorbing the sun's heat during the day and radiating it back at night, creating a stable, livable temperature in a land of extremes. Their cities were masterpieces of adaptation, proof of a deep, hard-won knowledge of their harsh, beautiful landscape. yet these very cities were eventually abandoned. The archaeological evidence points to a prolonged, devastating drought, a climatic shift that their ingenious adaptations could not overcome. But the story is often more complex than a simple change in the weather. We can read the fingerprints of a society's own resource consumption in its ruins. The demand for timber to fuel the lime kilns that produced mortar, or to build ever larger palaces and fleets, often led to widespread deforestation of the surrounding hills. Soil samples from ancient Greece show a marked decline in tree pollen and a rise in erosion-linked sediments, a silent testament to hillsides stripped bare. This overexploitation created a vicious cycle. Deforestation led to soil erosion, which reduced agricultural yields, which in turn weakened the kingdom's economic foundation. A civilization that fails to manage the resources it depends upon, that lives too lavishly on its environmental capital, is building its own collapse from the inside out. This delicate and often broken balance with nature forces us to look beyond the grand structures and the scorched earth, to seek a more intimate human story written not in stone but in bone. The treasures buried with a king tell us more about the living than the dead. Descend into the cool, dark interior of an early Egyptian mastaba tomb, a flat-roofed structure of mud brick and stone. At its heart lies a solid, impassable slab known as the false door. This was not a real entrance but a spiritual one, a magical conduit through which the soul of the deceased could travel to receive offerings from the world of the living. Beside it, you would find a stone offering table perpetually set for an eternal feast. This entire arrangement was built on a profound and practical belief that the afterlife required perpetual sustenance and that the comfort of the departed soul depended entirely on the diligence of those left behind. The scale and lavishness of a society's mortuary architecture is one of the most direct reflections of its spiritual worldview and the immense power of its elite. Tombs were not merely graves, they were machines for immortality, and their construction consumed a staggering share of a kingdom's wealth. Consider the mausoleum at Halicarnassus, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. This was not just a tomb for a regional ruler, it was a mountainous, ornate structure adorned with intricate sculptures, a monument so grand it forever changed our word for a grand burial place. Its construction was an act of breathtaking public expenditure, a clear signal that the state's resources were being channeled to ensure the divine status and eternal comfort of a single individual and their dynasty. This monumental investment in the dead often came at a direct cost to the living, a societal choice that could not be sustained forever. We can read a civilization's changing fortunes in its shifting burial practices. A sudden, widespread move away from lavish, monumental tombs towards simpler, more uniform graves is a powerful archaeological signal. It can point to a religious reformation, like the one in ancient Egypt under the pharaoh Akhenaten, who rejected the old gods and their complex death rites, appending 1,000 years of tradition. More often, it signals severe economic constraint, where a society simply no longer has the surplus labor or capital to build pyramids for its leaders. In the most extreme cases, a complete absence of elite burials suggests something even more final: the utter collapse and elimination of the ruling class itself. This evolution is starkly visible in Egypt's own history. The progression from the towering, impossible-to-miss pyramids of the Old Kingdom to the hidden, rock-cut tombs in the Valley of the Kings during the New Kingdom was a direct, pragmatic response to a very living world problem: tomb robbers. The pyramids were virtual beacons shouting the location of unimaginable wealth to every potential thief. The hidden tombs were a desperate and ultimately futile attempt at security. This shift from overwhelming public statement to concealed secret reveals a kingdom adapting not just to spiritual beliefs, but to the harsh realities of a fragile economy and the relentless greed of its own people. The silent, sealed door of a tomb, therefore, is the final contract between a civilization and its gods, a last will and testament written in stone, detailing what they truly valued when faced with the ultimate mystery. The Rosetta Stone's cool, granitic surface holds more than ancient script, it holds a conversation. Its parallel inscriptions in Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphics did not just unlock the language of the pharaohs, they gave a direct, unfiltered voice to a civilization that had been silent for millennia. Epigraphy, the study of these inscriptions carved into stone, offers our 14th and most literal architectural clue. When a king commissioned a victory stele or a cornerstone for a new temple, he was doing more than recording an event. He was casting his legacy in a medium meant to last forever. These are not subtle hints, they are explicit proclamations giving us names, genealogies, specific dates of battles, and the exact boundaries of territories. The grandiloquent titles a ruler assigns himself, like Ramses II's preferred lord of the two lands and strong bull, beloved of Mot, are pure political propaganda, a crafted public image set in stone for all time. The choice of language itself is profoundly revealing. When the rulers of the vast Achaemenid Persian Empire, like Darius I, carved their monumental inscriptions at Behistun in 3 different cuneiform scripts, they were making a strategic statement of control. By communicating in the languages of their subject peoples, they were broadcasting an administrative reality. This was a multicultural empire that understood the power of speaking to its diverse population in terms they could comprehend. But this direct line to the past has a terrifying counterpart: its sudden silence. The cessation of dated inscriptions is one of the most definitive markers of a collapse. In the Maya world, we can track the downfall of city-states with chilling precision. The last long count date carved on a monument at a major center like Tikal or Palenque is like a final, desperate entry in a diary before the pen is dropped forever. This silence signifies more than just a disruption. It marks the dissolution of the entire literate class, the scribes, the stone carvers, the administrators who kept the kingdom's records and memory. When that bureaucracy vanishes, the state's ability to project its identity, to tax its people, and to command its own history vanishes with it. The society plunges into what archaeologists call a historical dark age, where the written word disappears and the stones, once annotated with clear messages, are left to stand alone, their stories now cryptic puzzles. This forces us to rely on the final, most technologically advanced tools in our arsenal to hear what those silent stones are still trying to say. A single stone can confess the secrets of a forgotten economy. When geologists analyze a thin sliver of pottery or a chip of granite under a microscope, they are reading a material passport, a record of its geological birthplace. This is our 15th architectural clue, the profound story told by material science and sourcing. The very substance of a building, where it came from and how it got there, reveals a civilization's economic reach and its place in a wider world. The discovery of a specific type of marble quarried from a distant mountain range and used in a provincial town's central temple is not just an aesthetic choice. It is a physical declaration of wealth and connection. It tells us that the town was plugged into a vast, functioning trade network, that merchants and officials could move valuable, heavy goods across hundreds of miles safely, and that the local elite had the means to pay for such extravagant imports. This is the hard evidence of economic integration. The vibrant blue lapis lazuli found in royal tombs at the ancient Sumerian city of Ur provides a stunning example. This semi-precious stone's only known source in the ancient world was a single, remote valley in what is now Afghanistan. For it to travel over 1,500 miles across mountains and deserts to be placed in a Mesopotamian grave speaks of a Bronze Age globalization, a web of trade and exchange that connected disparate cultures long before the term was ever coined. Yet this very connectivity becomes a source of vulnerability. The story of a civilization's decline is often written in a dramatic reversion to local materials. When you see a later phase of construction built on the foundations of a grand edifice, using rough, uncut fieldstone instead of the imported ashlar blocks of the original, you are witnessing the collapse of that trade network in real time. The long-distance routes have become too dangerous, too expensive, or have simply vanished. The society, once outwardly focused and cosmopolitan, is now turning inward, forced into a desperate self-sufficiency that signals its isolation and dwindling power. This scientific analysis of stone and clay provides an undeniable, data-driven backbone to the story of a kingdom's rise and fall, a story that is echoed in the more subjective but equally revealing artistic style of its final monuments. The subtle, intentional bulge in the center of a Greek column is a masterclass in cultural ambition. This feature, called entoses, was not a structural necessity but a profound artistic choice. The builders knew that perfectly straight lines would appear concave to the human eye, so they introduced this gentle curve to create an illusion of perfect, soaring straightness. This obsession with idealized proportion, visible in every aspect of their temples, reveals a society deeply committed to harmony, reason, and a mathematical view of beauty. This is our 16th architectural clue, the powerful story told by the evolution of architectural style itself. The changing aesthetics of a civilization's buildings are a direct reflection of its shifting values, its external contacts, and its internal creative vitality. The rigid, masculine Doric order gives way to the more slender, graceful Ionic, and finally to the ornate, vegetal Corinthian capital. This progression is not random. It charts a society's journey from stern militarism to increasing wealth, refinement, and a desire for more elaborate expression. A sudden, dramatic infusion of a foreign style acts as an undeniable timestamp of contact. After Alexander the Great's armies marched into northwest India, the artistic record explodes with a fascinating hybrid. For the first time, Buddhist sculptures begin to appear, depicting the Buddha in graceful, Hellenistic-style robes, with features influenced by Greek gods. This Greco-Buddhist art stands as permanent, stone-carved proof of a massive cultural collision, a moment when two worlds met and forever changed each other's artistic DNA. Yet, just as a new style signals vibrancy, the stagnation of that style signals a profound cultural fatigue. When you see a later civilization, perhaps in a period of decline, clumsily replicating the grand architectural forms of its golden age, the message is clear. The creative spark has faded. The society has lost the confidence to invent, choosing instead to look backward with a kind of nostalgic mimicry, producing hollow echoes of a greatness it can no longer authentically create. This reliance on past forms, this failure of architectural imagination, is a quiet admission that a culture's forward momentum has stalled. And when a society stops building for its own future, what does that tell us about the spirit of the people who walk its streets and the ultimate fate of the world they have constructed? A hidden hoard of coins buried in a rush beneath a villa's floor is a civilization's final, silent scream. While not architecture in itself, the small finds uncovered within buildings, especially coinage, provide a startlingly precise timeline and a brutal honesty about economic health that grand monuments often try to hide. This is our 17th architectural clue, the story told by numismatics and economic evidence from context. A single coin, minted with the portrait of an emperor, found sealed beneath a foundation stone, gives archaeologists a firm date. That building cannot be older than the coin, a principle known as terminus post quem, or the limit after which it anchors the entire structure in a specific moment of history. But the real story is often told by the coins found in the layers of destruction and collapse. The debasement of currency is a desperate act with a long archaeological shadow. Imagine holding two coins from the late Roman Empire, separated by just 50 years. The first, from a time of stability, is heavy, made of nearly pure silver. The second, found in the burned rubble of a town sacked during an invasion, is lightweight, a bronze core dipped in a thin wash of silver. This silent transition from solid money to near-worthless token is a clear signal of state panic. An empire was cutting its coins with cheaper metal to stretch its treasury, effectively taxing its people through inflation to pay for its armies and, crucially, its grandiose building projects. The grand public baths and triumphal arches erected during this period of monetary decay were not signs of robust health, but magnificent facades paid for with empty currency, a final, spectacular binge before the economic collapse became undeniable. This tangible evidence of a struggling economy, pulled from the very floors and walls of ruins, adds a crucial human layer of desperation to the story told by the stones. It forces us to look beyond politics and economics to the very climate that sustained it all, and to ask what broader environmental forces could have pushed such a complex financial system over the edge. The timber in a king's hall holds the memory of the rain that fell while it grew. We can now read the annual diary of ancient climates preserved in the very materials used to build these civilizations, from the growth rings in a wooden roof beam to the chemical signatures locked inside stalagmites from deep caves. This 18th architectural clue, Paleoclimatology, connects human history directly to the Earth's own story. By analyzing ice cores from glaciers, sediment layers from lake beds, and speleothems, those mineral deposits that form in caves over millennia, scientists are constructing a precise timeline of past climates. This data reveals a powerful, often brutal correlation. A dynasty's most ambitious building program, a golden age of soaring temples and sprawling new cities, often coincides perfectly with a long period of reliable, abundant rainfall and fertile harvests. The wealth and labor needed to reshape a landscape are born from full granaries, but the architectural record also preserves the panic that follows when the climate turns. A period of monumental construction can be abruptly followed by a phase of frantic, defensive works, as if a society that was once reaching for the heavens suddenly crouched behind hastily thickened walls. The story of the classic Maya is a haunting example. Their great city-states with their towering pyramids and vast plazas were abandoned over a relatively short period. For a long time, scholars debated whether the collapse was caused by warfare or internal rebellion. Now, the climate data tells a more elemental story. Core samples from nearby lakes show a series of profound, multi-decade megadroughts that struck right at the time the cities were falling silent. The Maya had built a brilliant civilization in a delicate environment, reliant on seasonal rains to fill their reservoirs and grow their maize. When those rains failed year after year, their agricultural base crumbled. No amount of royal power or religious ceremony could make the sky open. The social contract, the belief that the king could intercede with the gods for rain, shattered. Their grand architecture, a testament to their mastery of the world, became a monument to their vulnerability to it. This intersection of human ambition and environmental reality reminds us that the fall of a kingdom is not always a drama of swords and fire. but sometimes a slow, silent suffocation under a changed sky, a story of decline written not in battle plans, but in the thirst of the very soil they stood upon. The legendary walls of Troy were not just a physical barrier, they were a psychological fortress built from myth. For centuries, the story of its divine construction was dismissed as pure Homeric fantasy, a poetic invention. Then archaeologists began to dig, and they found not one city but 9, each built upon the skeletal ruins of its predecessor. This stunning layering of history proved a profound truth, that the myths we often set aside as mere stories are frequently encoded into the very design of a civilization's most important spaces. This is our 19th architectural clue, the way myth and legend become frozen in a city's blueprint. The symbolic layout of a sacred city was often a deliberate attempt to mirror the cosmos, to bring heaven down to earth. Across Southeast Asia, the ancient Khmer built their capital at Angkor Thom as a perfect square, bisected by causeways leading to a central temple mountain. This was a direct physical representation of Mount Meru, the axis of the universe in Hindu and Buddhist cosmology. The city was not just a place for people to live, it was a living mandala, a sacred diagram meant to align human society with the divine order and ensure cosmic harmony. The very act of walking its streets was a spiritual journey. This deep, symbolic power of place explains one of archaeology's most haunting phenomena, the persistence of the sacred. A single hilltop or spring considered holy by one culture will often see temple after temple built upon it by the civilizations that follow, even if they worship different gods. The Parthenon in Athens stands on a site that was sacred long before the classical Greeks built their marble masterpiece. Before them, it held an earlier temple, and before that, a Mycenaean palace, and likely a place of worship stretching back into the deep mists of prehistory. Each new culture felt the same intangible power in that specific location, a spiritual gravity that compelled them to build their own house for the divine upon the same hallowed ground. This continuity of sanctity, visible in the layered stones of 1,000 sacred sites worldwide, reveals a human impulse that transcends the rise and fall of any single kingdom. It speaks to a shared search for meaning, a collective memory of place that proves more enduring than any empire, a truth we can find not only in grand temples but also etched into the humble objects of everyday life. A broken potsherd is a civilization's most humble and therefore most honest historian. Discarded in a midden heap behind a vanished home, these ceramic fragments are not just trash, they are durable diaries of daily life. The clay's unique mix of minerals, its temper, is like a geological signature pointing to a specific local source or a distant trade route. The style of a painted rim, the curve of a handle, these artistic choices are a cultural fingerprint, changing with the fashions and beliefs of the people who used them. Because these styles evolve so quickly, archaeologists can use pottery to date archaeological layers with remarkable precision. A building's foundation sealed beneath a floor containing a certain type of pottery cannot be younger than that pottery's period of use. This turns every broken plate into a tiny time capsule, anchoring grand stone walls to a specific generation. The sudden appearance of a new pottery form is often a clear signal of contact or conquest. The arrival of the fast potter's wheel in a region that previously used only hand coiling techniques is not merely a technological upgrade. It represents a revolution in production, a move towards standardization and efficiency that often accompanies a new, more centralized social order. It is the material evidence of new ideas or new people arriving and changing the very rhythm of daily life. But just as its introduction signals vibrancy, its decline tells a story of contraction. In the final, crumbling layers of a great city, you often see a dramatic drop in both the quality and the variety of pottery. The finely painted wares, the exotic imports from across the sea, they all disappear. What remains are crude, locally made vessels, thick-walled and poorly fired. This simplification is a silent scream. It means the specialized potters, the artists who once perfected their craft, are gone. The long-distance trade networks that brought in exotic clays and distributed beautiful finished goods have snapped. The society is turning inward, its economy and its culture shrinking back to a bare, local subsistence. This microscopic evidence found in the dust of a commoner's home grounds the epic saga of a kingdom's fall in the most intimate reality, the dwindling quality of a family's cooking pot. And just as the clay of that pot holds the story of a community's connections, the bones of the people who ate from it hold the story of their bodies, revealing the ultimate cost of that collapse in the most personal terms imaginable. The bones of a civilization tell its most intimate and unflinching story. A skeleton pulled from a humble cemetery is an archive of a single life, its bones recording every famine, every bout of disease, and every decade of grueling labor. Paleopathology, the study of ancient disease, gives us our 21st architectural clue, a direct line from the grand structures of a kingdom to the fragile health of the people who built them. The architecture of daily life, especially in crowded cities, creates a biological environment that leaves its mark on the human body. In the sprawling insulae, the cramped tenement blocks of ancient Rome, families were packed into small, poorly ventilated rooms. The lack of proper sanitation and clean running water created a perfect breeding ground for tuberculosis and other respiratory infections. We can find the evidence for this in the skeletal remains, in the distinctive lesions that tuberculosis leaves on the spine, a quiet testament to a life spent breathing in a stifling, contaminated atmosphere. This is the hidden cost of urban grandeur, where the magnificent public baths and aqueducts sometimes masked a brutal reality of overcrowding and public health neglect for the masses. The connection becomes even more chillingly direct with the Romans' own engineering marvels. Their sophisticated plumbing systems used lead pipes to bring water into homes and public fountains. For centuries, this was seen as a triumph of civil engineering. But modern analysis of Roman bones tells a different story. Skeletons from across the empire show dangerously high levels of lead, a cumulative and insidious poison that can cause neurological damage, infertility, and a general decline in cognitive function. The very infrastructure that defined Roman advancement was slowly, invisibly sickening its population. This is not just a historical footnote. It is a physical link between an architectural choice and a societal ailment, a slow-burning public health crisis preserved in the calcium of human remains. On a broader scale, we can read a society's general well-being in the average height of its people. Consistent good nutrition during childhood results in a population reaching its full genetic potential for height. A sudden decline in average stature across generations, visible in cemetery data, is a powerful signal of widespread nutritional stress, of famines, or of a social system where the caloric needs of the common people are not being met. When you see this decline coincide with the construction of ever larger palaces and monuments, it paints a stark picture of a ruling class feasting while its foundation starves. The health of a people, written in their bones, is the ultimate measure of a civilization's true resilience, a biological truth that no grand facade can long conceal. A single shard of Chinese silk, found preserved in the damp soil of a Viking trading post, speaks of a world more connected than we often imagine. This fragile thread, carried across continents, is a direct physical link between the Longhouse and the distant imperial court. The presence of such imported luxury goods within architectural contexts, from palace storerooms to humble graves, forms our 22nd great architectural clue, a clear measure of a kingdom's economic interconnectedness. These objects are not merely beautiful artifacts, they are the hard evidence of a thriving, long-distance trade network, the ancient equivalent of a global shipping container arriving in port. The specific distribution pattern of these goods allows us to map invisible highways, finding Mediterranean glass beads in a Swedish market town or Indian spices in the cargo of a Roman shipwreck. Lets us trace the arteries of commerce that pumped wealth and ideas across the known world. A society with access to such a network was cosmopolitan, its economy robust and its merchants confident enough to send valuable cargo on perilous journeys. But the story these goods tell can turn suddenly dark. The gradual, then complete, disappearance of these exotic items from the archaeological record is one of the most reliable early warning signs of systemic failure. It means the ships have stopped sailing, the caravan routes across the desert have become too dangerous, the trust required for such long-distance exchange has evaporated. This economic isolation does not happen overnight, but over decades, slowly strangling a kingdom's access to wealth, new technologies, and even diplomatic intelligence. A society that once looked outward, its horizons broad and its markets filled with the world's wonders, begins to turn inward. Its world shrinks, and this new, confined reality is often reflected in a parallel shift in its art, which becomes more provincial, repeating local motifs without the fresh influence that once flowed in along those same trade routes. The silence left by vanished silk and absent glass tells a story of a civilization quietly retreating from the world stage, long before its final political collapse is written in stone and fire. The deliberate chisel marks scarring a statue's face are a form of violent writing. Across the ancient world, from the temples of Egypt to the churches of Byzantium, we find this same brutal pattern, the targeted mutilation of specific images. This is our 23rd architectural clue, the stark evidence of iconoclasm, a word that literally means image breaking. It is far more than random vandalism. It is a calculated act of ideological erasure, an attempt to murder a symbol and silence the power it once held. When you see the eyes and noses carefully chiseled off a row of stone gods, you are witnessing a revolution frozen in stone. The iconoclasts understood that to conquer a people, you must first conquer their visual landscape, dismantling the sacred imagery that reinforced the old order's authority. The smashing of Christian icons during the Roman persecutions was a state-sanctioned effort to demoralize a growing faith by destroying its focal points of worship. Centuries later, the destruction of colossal Buddhist statues by invading armies served a similar purpose, a physical declaration that the old gods were dead and a new spiritual reality had taken hold. This architectural violence is a clear testament to periods of profound and often brutal cultural shift. Yet, this act of destruction is also a perverse form of validation. A society only expends the effort to systematically deface the art of a predecessor if that art was perceived to still hold power, its symbolic threat so potent that it demanded a physical response. The scarred surface of a beheaded sphinx screams two stories at once: the story of the civilization that built it with such confident grandeur, and the story of the one that felt so threatened by its enduring presence that it had to tear it down. This cycle of creation and destruction, written so violently onto the stones of history, finds its origins not in grand revolutions, but in the quiet, foundational moments when a people first decided to mark a place as their own. The circular mud brick huts of Çatalhöyük huddled together like a giant honeycomb, their doorways opening onto the rooftops of neighboring homes. This was not a random village, but one of the world's first proto-cities, a dense, interconnected settlement where life was lived literally on top of one another. The architecture of these earliest towns holds the cultural DNA, the very blueprint for the great kingdoms that would follow. The initial decision to cluster homes so tightly was a revolutionary act. It signaled a move away from isolated, self-sufficient family units toward a new, interdependent way of life, a social contract written in mud and reed. Within this dense fabric, we find the first whispers of the institutions that would later define civilization. A single, larger building, distinct from the domestic huts and filled with bull skulls and figurines, hints at a shared spiritual practice, a communal shrine that served the entire settlement. Even more telling are the early granaries, structures designed not for a single family but for the collective storage of surplus food. This architectural innovation marks a pivotal moment, the point where a society transitions from living hand-to-mouth to planning for the future, creating a buffer of wealth that could support specialists, leaders, and artists. The subtlest clue of all is the slight variation in house size and the quality of goods found within them. One dwelling might be slightly larger, its walls adorned with more elaborate paintings, its floors containing a greater number of imported obsidian tools. This is the birth of social stratification, the moment when equality begins to fray and a hierarchy starts to crystallize, all visible in the footprint of a home. To understand the soaring pyramid or the imposing citadel, we must first stand in the shadow of these simple, crowded huts. Their unassuming design contains the seed of every empire, a reminder that the most complex societies are built upon foundations of communal trust and ambition that first took shape in the humblest of rooms. This foundational trust would eventually demand a system to manage it, a bureaucracy whose birth we can trace not in grand monuments, but in the most mundane of objects, the humble clay token. A Mesopotamian palace was not just a royal residence, it was a machine for governing. Its sprawling complex included vast, nondescript rooms where armies of scribes sat on brick benches, their styly pressing marks into damp clay tablets. These were not love letters or epic poems, but meticulous inventories, grain shipment receipts, and labor rosters for temple construction. This administrative architecture, the physical footprint of a state bureaucracy, forms our 25th great clue. The very existence of dedicated buildings for record-keeping, tax collection, and legal proceedings is a monumental statement. It tells us that a society has moved beyond the rule of a single charismatic chieftain and has created a system, an impersonal, self-perpetuating entity designed to outlive any individual ruler. The scale and complexity of these administrative centers are a direct measure of the state's reach. A simple chieftain might need one clerk to track his herds, but an empire needs a labyrinth of offices to manage the grain that feeds its cities, the metals that arm its soldiers, and the labor that builds its walls. This bureaucracy is the kingdom's brain, and its archives are its long-term memory. The burning of these archives is therefore a form of cerebral catastrophe. In the final, fiery destruction of the Mycenaean palaces, the clay tablets baked hard in the inferno, preserving for us the last desperate records of the state. But for the civilization itself, that fire meant the utter annihilation of its institutional memory. Who owed what tax, which villages were due to send laborers for the spring planting? Where were the royal granaries located? All of that practical, essential knowledge, the data that made the kingdom function day to day, turned to ash and crumbled into silent clay. The collapse of this administrative machinery is the true, official death of a kingdom. A king can be defeated in battle, but if his tax collectors are still making their rounds and his scribes are still filing reports in a secure provincial office, the state endures. When those scribes drop their style for the last time and the archive doors are sealed by collapse or flame, the kingdom ceases to be a living entity. It becomes a ghost, its intricate systems and complex agreements vanishing, leaving behind only the silent, enigmatic stones we struggle to interpret today. A legacy of organization so profound we are only now beginning to grasp its full complexity. The principles of the Roman arch did not die with the empire, they merely slept, waiting for a future age to awaken their potential. 1,000 years after Rome's political collapse, Renaissance architects in Italy looked upon those same enduring arches and saw not just ruins but a blueprint for a new world. They studied the precise curves and load-bearing genius, and in doing so, they rediscovered a lost language of form and stability. This act of architectural resurrection, fueled by classical ideals, did more than just produce beautiful buildings. It helped shatter the intellectual constraints of the Middle Ages, proving that the legacy of a forgotten kingdom can fuel a revolution centuries after its fall. This enduring influence is our 26th and final architectural clue, the profound and often unexpected resonance of a civilization long after its voice has fallen silent. The solutions crafted by ancient builders are constantly being adopted, adapted, and reimagined. The grid-based urban planning of Mohenjo-Daro finds a direct echo in the layout of our modern cities. The sophisticated water management of the Persians inspires contemporary engineers facing their own droughts. The very stones themselves are often recycled, a physical inheritance like the marble quarried for a Greek temple that later found itself carved into a Roman statue, only to be ground down for lime in a medieval wall. This cycle of reuse is a powerful reminder that nothing is ever truly lost, only transformed. Our own fascination is the ultimate testament to their enduring power. Today, we peer through the canopy with LIDAR, a laser technology that reveals the ghostly footprints of entire Mayan cities hidden for a millennium. We send submersibles to map sunken ports and use ground-penetrating radar to locate unopened tombs. We are, in a very real sense, having a conversation across time, using the most advanced tools at our disposal to listen to what these silent stones have been trying to tell us all along. And this forces upon us a final, inescapable reflection. If the ruins of antiquity can speak so clearly to us, what undeniable story will the skeletal remains of our own glass and steel cities one day tell? Will future archaeologists see our soaring skyscrapers as our pyramids, our vast data centers as our granaries, and our sprawling highway networks as our Roman roads? The rise and fall of forgotten kingdoms, read through their architectural clues, is more than a history lesson. It is a mirror. It challenges us to consider what we are building, not just with our materials, but with our values, and to ask what we truly hope will endure when our own time becomes someone else's distant past. Margaret Mead's words echo across the centuries, finding a home not in grand halls, but in the silent testimony of ruins. We have walked together through these fallen palaces, learning to listen to the stories whispered by stone. The ambition of a pyramid, the fear in a fortress wall, the quiet desperation in a subdivided home, each clue has taught us that civilizations do not simply vanish. They unravel thread by thread in a complex web of environmental pressure, economic strain, and the slow fragmentation of the social contract, all meticulously recorded in the world they built around them. These forgotten kingdoms leave us with a profound and urgent legacy. They are a mirror reflecting our own world back at us, challenging us to see the choices we are making, the values we are casting in concrete and steel. The future is not some distant, predetermined fate. It is being written today in the structures we create and the systems we choose to maintain. So the next time you walk through your own city, pause for a moment. Look at the oldest building on your street, the bridge you cross every day, the public square where people gather. Ask yourself what story these places will tell. What will they say about our priorities, our fears, and our dreams? Share what you discover in the comments below and join us as we continue to uncover the deep mysteries of our shared human past.